Hello and welcome to episode 16 at the House of Dissent podcast. In this episode, I will be discussing the emergence of a new left-wing party in 2025 and the inevitable reaction to it by the right-wing propagandist press. But before I do that, some background first. After the defeat of the Labour Party in 2015, the then leader Ed Miliband resigned his position, which led to a leadership contest. Prior to the electoral defeat, parts of the tabloid press took it upon themselves to frame news about Ed Miliband with reference to Red Ed, with the sole purpose of presenting Miliband as a Marxist or having Marxist leanings. All because his father, Ralph Miliband, was a Marxist. Ed the son is not a Marxist. Oh dear, guilty by association. But don't let a few facts get in the way of tabloid propaganda as they sought to discredit Miliband with a view of persuading the public to distrust and vote against him, which they did. In September 2013, the Daily Mail produced this headline: "The man who hated Britain. Red Ed's pledge to bring back socialism is a homage to his Marxist father. So what did Miliband Sr. really believe in? The answer should disturb everyone who loves this country." And 2 years later, the Sun newspaper ran a piece headlined, "Save Our Bacon." And it had an image on the front page of Miliband eating a sandwich and looking as if he was about to throw up. That was published on May 6, 2015, a day before the general election. The Sun newspaper has a track record of supporting the establishment during election campaigns, evidenced when it published its propaganda piece on Neil Kinnock, the then leader of the Labour Party, on the same day of the 1992 election, with a picture of Kinnock with his head inside a light bulb, with the caption, "If Kinnock wins today, will the last person to leave Britain please turn out the lights?" Following Miliband's resignation, the candidates for the leader of the Labour Party were Yvette Cooper, Andy Burnham, Liz Kendall, and much to my and probably everyone else's surprise, one Jeremy Corbyn, a left-winger of little significance at the time. Cooper, Burnham and Kendall were, to put it politely, dull as dishwater and were standing as continuity candidates. During Miliband's time, I recall being bored rigid whenever I dare watch Question Time on the BBC, because there was little difference between the Labour Party and the Tories. There was no real choice for voters, and George Galloway summed it up perfectly when he said that, and I quote, "Labour and the Tories are two cheeks of the same backside." That summer of 2015, I spent 6 weeks travelling through northern Spain and France in my Mini Cooper, envisaging what a Labour Party might look like under Yvette Cooper, because I felt Kendall had no chance, Burnham neither, and as far as Corbyn was concerned, well, he should just pack up and leave the race, right? But when I boarded the ferry at Caen to return to the UK, I bought the Observer newspaper, went to my cabin, opened the paper, and to my astonishment read that Corbyn was favourite to win the Labour leadership contest. It was a bit like the Kennedy moment. I was so shocked reading about Corbyn, it has stayed with me ever since, crystal clear in my memory. I had never been a member of the Labour Party, but after Corbyn won, I, like thousands of others, joined the party, swelling the membership numbers in the process. Now this was met with horror by the majority of the parliamentary Labour Party. That's members of Parliament for those listening who are unfamiliar with the British system. The majority of the parliamentary party saw a socialist left-wing leader with huge grassroots support, and they did their best to remove Corbyn with not one leadership contest but two, and they failed. Those who wanted Corbyn removed colluded with the Tories, the press, and establishment figures in all sorts of ways. Now, Ed Miliband had got it relatively easy compared to the press coverage against Jeremy Corbyn, who in my view became the most vilified, demonised and hated leader by the press since the emergence of the mass media in the mid-19th century. Now just take that in for one moment. If you have listened to the other episodes from this podcast, particularly from 1 to 13, which concerns radical mass media criticism, you will know that there are a lot of critics of the media from the mid-19th century. But if not, I would suggest giving them a go, because if there is one running theme, and there are others, it is that the media under a capitalist system favour the status quo, with many intrinsically linked to the establishment, secret services and mainstream political parties, all of whom will destroy anyone that threatens the status quo. Soon after Corbyn won the leadership of the Labour Party, the Sun newspaper on September the 15th, 2015 ran the following headline: Labour hypocrite. Lefty who hates the royals will kiss the Queen's hand to grab £6.2 million. Now it had a picture of Corbyn wearing a court jester's hat to drive home the image of Corbyn as a fool. On September the 27th, 2017, The Guardian ran a headline stating, "People saw through it. Corbyn hits back at Daily Mail attacks," with the paper reporting, and I quote, "Jeremy Corbyn has attacked overwhelmingly hostile press coverage of Labour and his leadership, and said the June election results showed people were no longer affected by reams of negative articles. In his speech at the Labour conference in Brighton, Corbyn said he had been targeted with 14 pages of attacks in one paper on a single day, but it had strengthened support for the party. There were some who didn't come out of the election too well," Corbyn said, to applause and laughs in the conference hall. And Corbyn continued, "I'm thinking of some of our more traditional media friends. They ran the campaign they always do, under orders from their tax exile owners, to trash Labour at every turn." And the paper continued. One delegate shouted, "Yes, the BBC," as Corbyn criticised the coverage the party had received. However, Corbyn himself made the right-wing Daily Mail and its editor Paul Dacre the main target of his attack. Corbyn also said this: "The day before the election, one paper devoted 14 pages to attacking the Labour Party, and our vote went up nearly 10%. Never have so many trees died in vain. The British people saw right through it. So this is a message to the Daily Mail's editor. Next time, please could you make it 28 pages. Now, on the day prior to the 2017 election in the UK, the Daily Mail's headline was "Apologists for Terror," with images of Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell and Diane Abbott, with the text stating, "Today, the Daily Mail accuses Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell and Diane Abbott, the troika who could run the next government, of being unashamed apologists for terror, who have devoted their lives to befriending the enemies of Britain while undermining the very institutions that keep us safe in our beds." The paper listed several academics who had supported Corbyn's economic programme, who they claimed were Marxists. Yes, when all else fails, use Marxism as a weapon to scare the pants off the electorate. And if that fails, they could always wheel out Leon Trotsky, who is the ultimate bogeyman for the right-wing propagandist press to use to produce a culture of fear. These examples are a small number of the virulent attacks upon Jeremy Corbyn and his colleagues close to him, and although they failed in the 2017 election, they succeeded in the 2019 election, where working people from the so-called Red Wall constituencies chose to elect a known liar and ex-pupil of Eton School, rather than Corbyn, whose manifesto would have benefited them greatly. Yes, they chose the fancy-named Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson, a man of privilege and wealth, as their leader of the United Kingdom. On September the 5th, 2019, The Sun produced this headline: Corbyn clucks up Britain, and it had an image of a chicken with Corbyn's face added, with the text stating, "Is this the most dangerous chicken in Britain?" The Daily Mail ran a headline on February 19th, 2019, with the headline, "Leader who's lost the plot," with an accompanying image of Corbyn holding sacks of vegetables. Added text said, and I quote, "7 decent MPs resign from party they brand institutionally anti-Semitic, led by a man who's a threat to national security." Now note the use of the word decent in the text. The anti-Corbyn news discourse has successfully manipulated people on a mass scale, just as it had done on previous occasions. The right-wing propagandist press know that they can manipulate a substantial portion of the people who are either uneducated and or ignorant of politics. Which brings me to the here and now in 2025. 10 years since Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party with his announcement of a new political left-wing party. Corbyn was suspended from the Labour Party in 2020 and finally stopped from running as a Labour candidate for the election in 2024. It was complete. He had become a political outcast, and the entire establishment, including the majority of past and present parliamentary Labour Party members, either rubbed their hands in glee, or in the case of the newbies, were just indifferent. It was the former Labour MP Zara Sultana who first announced that she and Corbyn were to propose a new political party shortly after her resigning from the Labour Party. Sultana previously had the whip removed, effectively meaning she was expelled from the party and forced to sit as an independent. So the question is this: given that Jeremy Corbyn has been the most vilified, hated and demonised politician in the UK since the arrival of the mass media, what are his and his new party's chance of success? Well, firstly, since their announcement on July 24th, 2025, it is claimed that by August the 6th, around 600,000 people had signed up to their party, which currently remains nameless, other than, for convenience, it is temporarily called Your Party. That figure would make it the largest party in the UK, with the Labour next on 309,000, Reform on 529,000, the Tories on 123,000, Liberal Democrats on 90,000, and the Green Party on 65,000. So how has the venomous propagandist right-wing press and Labour ministers reacted to the emergence of this new left-wing party? Well, first up is Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who on Saturday, August 3rd, told Tory acolyte Ian Dale on his LBC show that he, Corbyn, tried to destroy my party, and he can now go set up his own party. The country has rejected him twice. The bloke's got a big ego. He cannot have another go, but I think the country will have the same verdict. And then on July 3rd, 2025, the Daily Mail ran this headline: Jeremy Corbyn says he will form, and probably lead, a new hard left party to challenge Labour, as polls suggest 10% of voters could back it. And on July 9th, 2025, the Daily Mail ran this headline: almost a fifth of Britons say they could back a new Jeremy Corbyn-led hard left party, including almost a third of Labour supporters. 10 months earlier, the Daily Mail's headline on September 2nd, 2024 was, Jeremy Corbyn joins pro-Palestinian independent alliance of MPs in Parliament to provide a real alternative to austerity, inequality and war, and issues appeals to Labour left-wingers to join them. And in the text they refer to Corbyn as a hard left icon. Note the constant, steady, drip-feed references in all the articles to the hard left, which signifies extreme. In the same article, the Mail referred to MP for Leicester South, Shaukat Adam, a member of the pro-Palestine Independence Alliance, of which Corbyn belongs to, where it said, a Mail on Sunday investigation last month revealed he was the Leicester chairman for Muslim Engagement and Development, otherwise known as MEND, which former Tory Minister Michael Gove labelled as Islamist this year. But this is a falsehood, as a report from the BBC in March 2024 demonstrated that Gove said something completely different. He, Gove, also named the Muslim Association of Britain, CAGE, and Muslim Engagement and Development, MEND, as organisations that, and I quote, give rise to concern for their Islamist orientation and views. And the BBC goes on to say this, quoting Gove, we will be holding these and other organisations to account to assess if they meet our definition of extremism and will take action as appropriate, said Gove. He defined Islamism as a totalitarian ideology that calls for an Islamic state governed by Sharia law and should not be conflated with Islam itself. Nowhere did Gove say that MEND was Islamist, as the Mail had claimed. The Mail also included this in the article. Mr. Shaukat Adam is also the brother of Ismail Patel, 62, founder of the extremist Friends of Al-Aqsa, one of the groups to have organised pro-Gaza protests since October 7. Now that's like saying that King Charles is guilty of association because of the numerous indiscretions of his brother Prince Andrew. And finally they say this in relation to Adnan Hussein, also in the pro-Palestine Independent Alliance and MP for Blackburn. According to the Telegraph, Mr. Hussein told a rally in Hyde Park, London in 2014, and they quote Mr. Hussein, ISIS are terrorists and so are the Israeli government. There is no difference between them. And the Mail continues. He defended his comments at the time by saying that, and quoting Hussein once again, acts of violence inflicted upon a civilian population for political motivations should be classed as terrorism. Now, my reading of this statement accusing the Israelis of terrorism is to agree 100% with it, although it should be reclassified as state terrorism. But the Mail's intentions are to outrage its readers for how dare Mr. Hussein equate ISIS with Israel, and while there are no official numbers of ISIS deaths, the Israeli casualties are sufficient enough to categorize it as an act of genocidal state terrorism. On July 24, 2025, the Daily Express ran its headline, It's not your party, it's Jeremy Corbyn's latest ploy. It's going as well as you'd expect. It's about time Britain was granted a laugh. And its comment editor said this, Thank Christ Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana are here to give us a laugh. God knows we need it. These ex-members of the Labour's loopy left have bravely broken free of Starmer's stultification to bring us a political party that is easily the funniest thing since the anti-Brexit centrists, Change UK, tried to present themselves as a refreshing alternative. And he continues thus. Change UK remain one of my favourite things to ever happen to British politics, from the glory days of its clunky independent group for change through to their Nando summit of unwanted midwits and their eventually decline into irrelevance as Change UK. They gave much-needed cack-handed catharsis to Brexiteers with a surreal search for relevance. And finally he said, but Corbyn and Sultana might be even more ridiculous than those failures and has-beens. These two incompetents managed to botch the launch of their own party on July 4th, when Sultana publicly vowed to start a new party with Jeremy Corbyn, after quitting Labour. Now, the Mail, Express and the Sun are undoubtedly vile proponents of right-wing bile and propaganda. In my opinion, they don't even merit the title of newspapers and journalism, given their unashamedly notorious political bias towards the Tory party. Media effects, influence, the power of persuasion over the minds of people has been a controversial issue for many years. There is no definitive study that has revealed that the media in general can manipulate people's thinking, and yet there is plenty of anecdotal evidence out there to prove it can, and not just over uneducated people, but equally educated and very well educated people. There's no doubt in my mind that there are people in the United Kingdom who will support the new party, but its success rests on two principles. They are party discipline and unity. And if the left is good at one thing, it is that they can split, be ill-disciplined and disunified, and that's the biggest test of all for them. Of course, the Tories are in no position to criticise the left, given their factionalism and divisions, which brought them tumbling to their knees in the 2024 general election. It was a huge Labour victory, but personally speaking, I never had any faith in Keir Starmer, and I did not vote for him as leader. But as soon as he won, I left the Labour Party, because here was a man without conviction and principles. And just as Groucho Marx summed it up when he said, and I quote, "Those are my principles, and if you don't like them, well, I have others." Creating and maintaining a left-wing party in the UK is going to be met with the full force of the establishment, but the question is this: what type of socialism will the new party be based on? Now, some clues to the answer to that question are based on two figures who have had a political influence on Corbyn, which offer some insights towards the political philosophy of the new party. The first is Tony Benn, and the other is Mike Marcoussi. Writing for the Morning Star in March 2014, Corbyn wrote, "The death of Tony Benn is devastating to me, obviously to his family and to millions all around Britain and the world who recognised him as a friend, an honest man, and someone who passionately believed in the cause of socialism and humanity." And then, towards the end of the article, Corbyn says, "Thanks, Tony, for everything that you did and the path that your writings will continue to show about how to bring about change. It has been one of the great privileges of my life to have known you so well and worked with you on so many causes." Tony Benn, or Anthony Neil Wedgwood Benn, was also known as Viscount Stansgate from 1960 to 1963. He renounced his peerage so he could continue as a Member of Parliament, and he adhered to democratic socialism. Benn was also a committed Christian, adhering closely to the scriptures, and was a supporter of Christian socialism. a political and philosophical movement that blends socialist economics with the teachings of Jesus. It's not that far removed from the Catholic-based liberation theology that emerged in Latin America in the 1960s, although the latter were avowedly Marxist, blending Marx with the teachings of Jesus. Ben, however, admired much of Marx's writings, as does Corbyn, but didn't refer himself to as a Marxist, and this is the same for Corbyn, who has stated publicly that whilst he has read Marx, he has also read other economists. Corbyn was a part of the Independent Left Corresponding Society, where meetings were held at Ben's home in Holland Park in London, which was created as a mark of respect for the radical correspondence societies active in the latter half of the 18th century. The radical correspondence societies were unusual in that they drew their members primarily from the working class, and their inspiration for radical reform came from the American and French revolutions in the 18th century. Ben's adherence to democratic socialism and perhaps towards Christian socialism has shaped Corbyn's political philosophy. Democratic socialism is a system of thought that supports a mixed economy, i.e., a system that blends capitalist production with social ownership of the means of production. It also subscribes to a redistribution of wealth based on the common good, and is opposed to Marxist-Leninism because democratic socialism maintains the system of free elections rather than a one-party state. Although that said, democratic socialists mostly see it as a phase of development towards socialism. The second individual that Corbyn was close to, Mike Marcuse, who passed away 10 months after the death of Tony Benn in January 2015. And there was Corbyn defying all odds, becoming leader of the Labour Party. Not long after both deaths in September 2015, Marcuse was a Jewish American, labelled as a Marxist, but with interests which suggest a more eclectic political viewpoint. For instance, he was influenced by both William Blake and Thomas Paine, which appeals to Corbyn. In 1791, Blake had written his poem The French Revolution, where he celebrates the new democracy in France, with the accompanying fall of the French monarchy. 2 years later, in 1793, Blake wrote America, a poem extolling the virtues of revolution. Marcuse also held anti-Zionist views with a complete support for the Palestinian people, a cause central to Corbyn's heart. Marcuse was, like Corbyn, a Bennite, a supporter of Tony Benn. Now, Corbyn is an atheist, but in an intriguing article published in The Guardian in September 2016, titled Corbyn is an Atheist, but his ideas are true to the Bible, the parish priest for Elephant and Castle, Giles Fraser, said this: "Can it really be so inconceivable that Jeremy Corbyn's political philosophy is inimical to the British people when he, atheism notwithstanding, is the only one who even approximates to Christian teaching about wealth?" The article written by Giles Fraser was mainly to highlight the hypocrisies of those who subscribe to the Christian faith while simultaneously subscribing to free market capitalism, which both democratic socialists and Christian socialists see as incompatible with freedom, equality, and the teachings of Jesus. Fraser reminds us that most Tories are Christians, and that at the time of writing, the Queen was the head of the Church, and the Church of England is rigidly embedded within the establishment. As Giles Fraser also said at the time, absolutely nothing has been said by Jeremy Corbyn over the past few months is anything like as hostile to the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few as the Bible. Indeed, compared to the book of Amos and the Gospel of Luke, The campaign group Momentum are a bunch of bland, soft-peddling apologists for the status quo. So how then can Middle England sit through these readings without storming out, but apparently find Corbyn unelectable? Have they not been listening? Now I wish Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, and all those involved in the new party all the best, and goodness knows a left-wing party is much needed to resolve the gross inequalities in British society. And I've signed up. But as I said earlier, it requires discipline and unity, but more than anything else, it will need young people who are tech-savvy to compete and overcome the venomous bile that will be coming their way from the right-wing propagandist press, the political establishment, including Labour, and big business. In the next episode, I'll be discussing the insurrection that took place in Cherán, Mexico in 2011. Feel free to leave a comment. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.